They called it a graveyard with chandeliers. The Hotel Aldenver had 47 rooms, a crumbling ballroom ceiling, a kitchen that hadn't passed inspection in 3 years, and a reputation so ruined that even the pigeons on the roof had the decency to look embarrassed. When Dominic Cari tossed the iron skeleton key across the conference table and told me to fix it, he didn't say please. He didn't say anything, actually. He just slid the key toward me with 2 fingers, held my gaze for exactly 4 seconds, and walked out of the room. The key was old, heavier than it looked. I stared at it for a long time, long enough for his lieutenant, a man built like a cathedral door named Ren Vasile, to lean down and murmur close to my ear. He doesn't give things to people he doesn't believe in. I didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. Both seemed appropriate. I picked up the key. The iron was cold and faintly rough against my palm, like something that had been waiting a long time to be useful again. I should have known then that my entire life was about to change. My name is Simone Avro, and before that key landed in front of me, I was the assistant operations manager of the Cari Group's mid-tier portfolio. The kind of job title that sounds impressive at dinner parties and means absolutely nothing in rooms where actual power sits. I was 31 years old, a size 18 on a good day and a 20 on a bad one, and I had spent the better part of a decade being the most competent person in every room while being treated like the most forgettable. I knew yield management the way surgeons know anatomy. Not just the textbook of it, but the feel of it. The way a bad quarter smells before the numbers confirm it. The way a market shift announces itself 3 weeks early if you know what signals to read. I could look at an occupancy forecast at a glance and tell you within 3 percentage points where you'd land by quarter's end. I had turned around 2 underperforming properties in the Cari portfolio in the past 4 years. A boutique in the Miraval district that had been hemorrhaging $42,000 per quarter, and a conference center in Ostfeld. And both times, the credit had floated upward to the men above me while I received a fruit basket and a handshake. I was used to it. I had made peace with useful invisibility the way you make peace with a bad knee. You stop expecting it to behave, and you plan your route accordingly. The Aldenver was not a bad knee. The Aldenver was a collapsed spine. I had read the file on it twice before the meeting. 47 rooms. Grand ballroom with a sprung oak subfloor that had once been famous for its dance surface. A rooftop terrace with a view of the whole Ostfeld waterfront that, if I closed my eyes and forced myself to imagine it without the cracked tile and the mold damage and the broken irrigation system that had flooded the drainage beds 3 seasons running, was genuinely one of the most beautiful vantage points I had ever seen in any property the Cari Group held. The hotel had been purchased by Dominic Cari 14 months ago from the estate of a man named Aldo Ferris, who had run it as a personal vanity project for 30 years before dying at 81 in one of the 7th-floor suites, appropriately, I thought, and leaving it to heirs who didn't want it and couldn't sell it because the market had looked at the inspection reports and made a collective sound of polite revulsion. Its last full booking season had been 6 years prior. The kitchens had been shuttered after a health citation the previous chef's assistant had apparently tried to address with a mop and wishful thinking. The ballroom ceiling had a water stain, the shape of a continent spreading from the central rosette to the east wall, its edges brown and soft-looking. The kind of damage that suggested the roof above it had been quietly weeping for years. 2 of the 3 elevators were non-operational. The Yelp page, which I had read against my better judgment the night before at 11:30, describing it to my cat in real time, described it as, and I am quoting directly, like staying inside a very sad memory. And Dominic Cari had given it to me. Not to the VP of Operations, who was a man named Harlan Doss, who wore linen blazers regardless of the weather and took 3-hour lunches, and who had never personally managed a property turnaround in his life because he had spent his career learning how to take credit for other people's turnarounds. Not to the director of hospitality, who had an MBA from a school with a name that he dropped into every sentence like punctuation. To me, to Simone Avro. The woman who the Miraval Boutique's general manager had once described, in an email he did not know I had seen, as competent but a lot to look at. I had cried exactly once about that email, on a Tuesday night in my apartment, and then I had pulled the Miraval's Q3 numbers up on my laptop and found $17,000 in recoverable revenue that Harlan Doss had left sitting on the table through a failure to renegotiate the linen service contract, and I had felt considerably better. The morning after the key, I drove to the Aldenveer alone. I did not tell anyone I was going. I parked my 10-year-old Volvo on the cobbled side street at 6:45 in the morning, when the waterfront was still gray and the light had not yet decided what it wanted to be. And I stood on the pavement, and I looked up at the building for a long time. It was a Belle Epoque structure, 7 stories of carved limestone and wrought iron balconies, the kind of hotel that had once made people feel, upon entering, that they were briefly members of a better world. The facade was dirty, but intact. The ironwork needed repainting, but the bones were there. The curves, the corbels, the arched windows on the second floor that caught the early light at a particular angle and threw it in warm amber panels across the cobblestones below. I had my yellow legal pad under my arm. I had my camera. I had the key. I went inside. What I found over the next 6 hours was both worse and better than I had imagined, which I have found is the only honest thing you can say about any building that has been loved badly for too long. Worse, the kitchen equipment was largely unsalvageable, 3 decades of accumulated grease and neglect having turned it into something closer to archaeological artifact than functional infrastructure. The plumbing on floors 4 and 5 had been improperly winterized and had cracked in 2 places, which the building's one remaining maintenance employee, a man named Gus, described matter-of-factly. The carpeting in the main corridor was a shade of burgundy that had once been ambitious and now smelled like 12 consecutive bad decisions. Someone had, at some point, painted the original mahogany front desk a chalky, peeling white that made me want to sit down on the floor and recite a small eulogy. Better, the bones. The bones were extraordinary. The original parquet in the ballroom was under the carpet. I found a corner near the east wall where the carpeting had peeled back from years of moisture migration, and I pressed my palm flat to the exposed wood and felt the grain of it like I was checking a pulse. Oak. Old growth, close-grained, the kind of wood that costs more per square foot than most people's rent. The rooftop terrace was structurally sound. The rooms on floors 2 and 3 were large by modern standards, genuinely large, with ceiling heights of 11 feet and window dimensions that no hotel built in the last 30 years could match, because no developer in the last 30 years had been willing to sacrifice the floor count. And then there was the mosaic. The original mosaic in the lobby's entrance vestibule had been covered by a drop ceiling that someone had installed in the 1980s, the kind of suspended acoustic tile ceiling that announces, loudly and without apology, that the person who installed it was trying to save money and did not think anyone would look up. I found the edge of it where a tile had cracked and separated, and I climbed up on a chair and pressed one of the tiles aside, and I saw hand-cut Venetian glass underneath, midnight blue and gold and deep amber, a tessellated pattern of extraordinary intricacy, completely intact. Not a single piece missing. 42 square feet of it, as I would later learn, running from the entrance threshold to the base of the grand staircase. I climbed down from that chair, and I stood very still for a moment, with the dust still settling around me and the smell of old plaster in my nose. And I thought, I can do this. I thought, this place is not dead. It is only buried. I wrote 11 pages of notes. 11 pages single-spaced on yellow legal paper with a pen I had to shake twice to keep going. I drove back to the Kari Group offices with the windows down despite the cold. I asked Ren Vasile for a meeting with Dominic Carr, and Ren looked at me for a long moment, with his unreadable dark eyes, in his unreadable dark face, and said, "He'll see you at 7 tomorrow morning." I went home and I built the first draft of the recovery plan that night, and I did not sleep until 3 in the morning, and I was not tired, and I did not care at all. The meeting with Dominic Carey lasted 22 minutes, and he spoke for approximately 4 of them. He sat behind a desk that was entirely clear of clutter, no computer, no files, no coffee cup, nothing except his hands, folded together on the surface in front of him, and his gaze, which was the most focused and unnerving thing I had ever experienced in any professional setting. He was not what I had expected from the photographs in the business press. In photographs, he looked like a man who had been carved from something expensive and left to harden. But in person, there was also a quality of absolute stillness about him that the photographs could not convey, He listened to my 11-page plan without moving. He asked 3 questions, all of them surgical. What was my projected break-even timeline? What was my contingency if the plumbing remediation ran over estimate? And what was my thesis for the property's market positioning, given 2 newer boutique hotels that had opened in the Ostfeld waterfront corridor in the previous 18 months? I answered all 3 without consulting my notes. He was quiet for a moment after my last answer. Then he said, "You have full operational authority. Ren will give you the budget parameters. Don't ask for permission. Ask for resources." He stood. The meeting was over. I walked out into the hallway on legs that felt approximately functional, and Ren was waiting with his arms folded and his face doing nothing in particular. And I said quietly, more to myself than to him, "What just happened?" And Ren allowed himself the smallest possible approximation of a smile, the kind that appears and disappears so quickly you're not entirely sure you saw it, and said, "He trusted you." I gripped my legal pad, and I thought about the Aldenvere's parquet floors and the Venetian glass ceiling, and I thought, don't waste it. The budget Ren delivered the next morning was 48% lower than what I had privately hoped for, and about 60% of what any sensible contractor would have quoted for the remediation alone. This was, I understood immediately and completely, the test, not the key, not the 22-minute meeting. This, the impossible number, the inadequate resource, the implicit question of whether I would come back and ask for more, or whether I would find another way. This was the actual question being asked of me. I sat with the budget sheet for 2 hours. Then I started making calls. I had spent 10 years building relationships with suppliers, contractors, and specialty vendors across the region. And I had done it quietly, the way I did everything, without anyone above me noticing that I was doing it or thinking to ask why the assistant operations manager was personally cultivating a plasterwork restorer or a luxury furniture liquidator. Every relationship I had ever made out of genuine interest or professional care was now a card I could play. I called Marcus Veld, who did restoration plasterwork and owed me a referral from the Ostfeld Conference Center job. I called the Linetti family's tile and stone operation out of the River District, who had materials in their warehouse that no one had bought because they were too unusual for timid clients. I called Sue Park, a furniture dealer who specialized in European hotel liquidations and had a warehouse in the Port District full of pieces that other people had failed to appreciate. Things that other people had failed to appreciate. I called an ex-colleague from a previous employer who was now heading a culinary program at a regional institute and was actively looking for a restaurant partnership for his advanced students that would give them real service experience without the liability of a full capital investment. I called a woman I had met at a hospitality conference 4 years earlier who ran a small luxury travel press with a readership of exactly the kind of people who paid premium rates for properties with stories And I told her I had a story she would want to break first, and that I would give her exclusive access to the restoration process in exchange for the first feature. By the end of the second day, I had negotiated the plumbing remediation to 62% of the original quote through a combination of phased payment terms and a revenue-sharing arrangement on the private event bookings. The contractor's wife would cater. I had sourced the kitchen equipment through a hotel liquidation in Varel for 38 cents on the dollar. I had a commitment from a Michelin-trained chef named Odile Bren to take the restaurant space as a semi-autonomous lease, which meant the Aldenveer would carry a serious credentialed kitchen on essentially no capital risk. And I had a story running in a luxury travel publication in 6 weeks that was going to describe the Aldenveer's restoration as the most anticipated hotel revival of the season before a single room was finished. None of this had required me to go back to Dominic Carré and ask for permission. I sent Ren a one-page update at the end of day 2. 1 page, bullet points, numbers, projections, no editorializing. He replied 4 hours later with a single line. He saw it. Keep going. I kept going. The renovation took 9 months and 2 weeks. I moved into one of the functioning third-floor rooms in month 2, because the commute was eating 90 minutes a day that I did not have, and because, if I am honest with myself about what was happening, I had started to love the Aldenveer the way you love a difficult person. Exasperatedly, inconveniently, with a loyalty that has passed beyond reason into something more like commitment. I learned every inch of it, the way you learn the apartment of someone you care about, by feel, by habit, by the accumulation of small specific knowledge. I knew which stair on the back service staircase creaked, the fourth from the bottom, always, regardless of how carefully you placed your foot, and which window on the 6th floor caught the exact angle of the harbor light at 4 in the afternoon in a way that turned the water visible from it into hammered copper. I knew which corner of the ballroom had the best acoustic resonance. The plasterers Marcus Veld sent restored the ballroom ceiling in sections, working from scaffolding while I stood below with a flashlight and checked their work section by section against a historical photograph I had sourced from the city archives. The drop ceiling in the entrance vestibule came down on a Wednesday morning in month 3, when the Venetian mosaic was fully revealed. 42 square feet of midnight blue and gold and deep amber, the tessellated pattern running its full length from threshold to staircase base, entirely intact, not a single tessera missing or cracked. 2 of the workmen went quiet. Not the polite quiet of men who feel they should say something appreciative. The actual quiet of people who have unexpectedly encountered something beautiful and have not yet found the words. The original mahogany front desk was stripped of its terrible white paint in a process that took 11 days and required a specialist, Marcus knew, who worked exclusively in historic wood restoration. When Sue Park came to deliver the lobby furnishings, pieces I had approved by photograph and trusted completely, he stood in front of the restored desk for a full minute without speaking. Then he said, "You have to put it back exactly as it was." I said I knew. He said, "It's the whole story." It was. We did. There were people who came to see it and tried to take it from me. That is perhaps too dramatic a framing, but it is not inaccurate. Harlan Doss came twice in the 9 months, once in month 4, with a corporate consultant he had retained without informing me, or apparently anyone else in the Carré Group hierarchy, a corporate consultant, and once in month 7, with the VP of Real Estate Development, and a set of architectural plans I had never seen that proposed converting floors 5 through 7 into serviced apartments to improve the property's revenue per square foot metrics in the Carré Group's annual portfolio review. Both times I heard about the visits before they happened, because Ren Vasile had an instinct for keeping me informed of things I needed to know that I never questioned and never took for granted. And both times I had documentation prepared before they arrived, occupancy projections, comp set analyses, a rebuttal to the apartment conversion that showed it would reduce the property's achievable average daily rate by 31% within 18 months of completion, destroying the premium positioning the renovation was designed to create. The fourth-month visit ended with the consultant departing in his expensive car without leaving a report. The seventh-month visit, the one with the apartment plans, resulted in a phone call to Dominic Carr that I was not present for and did not hear, but whose outcome I learned the following morning when Wren appeared in the Aldenvere's lobby at 8 o'clock, looked around at the work in progress with the expression of a man cataloging data, and said simply, "The apartment plans are dead. He said to tell you, keep going." I looked at Wren for a moment. I said, "Does he ever come here?" Wren said, "More often than you know." I looked around the lobby, the mahogany desk gleaming with its recovered grain, the mosaic catching the morning light and doing something complicated with it, the newly refinished parquet visible through the archway into the ballroom. And I thought about being watched without knowing it. I thought about someone reading my operations reports and walking the halls of the Miravel boutique alone at closing. The feeling that settled in my chest was not uncomfortable. It was something closer to its opposite. Something that had no efficient name, and that I was careful, for the time being, not to examine too closely. The restaurant opened first, in month 8, as a soft preview. 40 seats, no reservations, a prefix menu of 4 courses that Odile Bren had built around what she described to me once over a late coffee as her grandmother's recipes reimagined through a classical French lens, which sounds pretentious and tasted like being held by someone who loves you unreservedly. The press dinner I had arranged with a luxury travel journalist ran 3 weeks before the hotel's formal opening, and the piece that ran, 3,000 words, a full-page photograph of the ballroom ceiling with the light falling through the restored plasterwork, a sidebar on the mosaic that quoted the city archivist, calling it one of the finest surviving examples of early-century decorative glasswork in the region, described the Aldenvere's restoration as something between an act of preservation and an act of faith. The article was shared 11,000 times in the first 48 hours. The hotel's email address, which I had set up myself on a quiet Sunday in month 6, received 214 reservation inquiries in the first 4 days after the piece ran. I sat in the office I had made for myself out of what had once been the Aldenvere's coat check room, which was small enough that the Victorian velvet wingback chair I had found in Sue Park's warehouse, deep green, from a dissolved Scottish estate, built for a body shaped something like mine, nearly filled it, and I opened the inquiry spreadsheet and I scrolled through it for a long time without doing anything practical. I thought about the key, cold and iron, sliding across a conference table toward me. I thought about the email about being a lot to look at. I thought about 11 pages of notes and 22 minutes and 48% less than I'd hoped for. And I thought about the way Marcus Veld's plasterman had gone quiet when the ceiling emerged from under the scaffolding. And I thought about a building that had been called a graveyard with chandeliers and was now making people plan their calendars around it. I closed my laptop and went down to the restaurant, and I asked Odile to make me whatever she felt like making that night. And I ate alone at a table by the window that looked out over the waterfront. And the food was a braised short rib with a celery root puree and a reduction that tasted like someone had spent 2 days making it because someone had, and I ate every bite of it without apology or arithmetic. And I was, for the first time in a very long time, not invisible to myself. The grand opening was on a Thursday evening in the second week of October, 11.5 months after Dominic Carr had slid a key across a table at me and walked away without looking back. The ballroom held 80 people for the reception: editors, investors, designers, travel writers, and a contingent from the city's hospitality board who had 6 months earlier told Harlan Doss in a meeting that I had not been invited to but had subsequently read the minutes of, that the Aldenvere was a write-off and the Carre Group should consider demolition and land sale. They stood in the restored ballroom under the repaired plasterwork ceiling, and did not appear to remember having said this, which I thought was its own kind of victory. I wore a gown I had found with the help of a designer named Celestine Duru, who worked in a small atelier in the Miravel district, and who specialized in women who have been told that their bodies are a problem requiring a solution. Celestine did not solve bodies. Celestine celebrated them. The gown was midnight blue, the same shade as the mosaic in the entrance vestibule, with a draped neckline and a silhouette that moved the way the velvet chair moved, like it had been built for this exact body and had been waiting patiently to meet it. I stood at the top of the Aldenvere's restored staircase at 7:58 in the evening, and I looked down at the lobby below. The mosaic lit from above by the restored sconces, the mahogany desk catching the candlelight from the reception table. The 80 people who had come because a ruined hotel had been made extraordinary. And for one full moment, I let myself feel all of it. Every 11-page plan, every phone call placed from a small coat check office at 11 at night. Every morning I had driven to a building that smelled like mildew and plaster dust and stood in it and believed it could be saved. Every time I had been forgettable on purpose, in rooms full of people who had decided I was not worth noticing, so that the work could be unforgettable. Then, someone touched my elbow very lightly, 2 fingers, just enough to know they were there. And I turned, and Dominic Carre was standing next to me. He had not been on the guest list. He looked at the lobby below for a moment and said nothing. Then he looked at me. "You did this," he said. It was not a question. His voice was quiet, the way a decision is quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after everything has already been settled and there is nothing left to negotiate. I said, "I had a key and a number and 11 pages." He said, "No. You had 48 years of everything this city forgot how to build, and you put it back." I considered telling him the hotel was only 47 rooms, not 48 years of anything. I decided not to correct him. His hand moved to my back, very lightly. The way you touch something, you are being very deliberate not to damage, and he said, "Will you walk through it with me?" I said yes. We walked through every room. Harlan Doss resigned from the Carre Group in November. 2 weeks after the Aldenvere's opening coverage ran in 4 national publications and 1 international design magazine that I had not pitched, but that had reached out independently after the luxury travel piece circulated. The letter he sent, which I learned about through Wren rather than official channels, was 2 paragraphs and contained the phrase, "Pursue other opportunities," which I read once, considered briefly, and filed. By December 1st, the Aldenvere was fully booked through April. 47 rooms, the restaurant running at capacity 6 nights a week, the ballroom reserved for 6 private events, including a wedding in March that had been booked the day after the opening feature ran. The rooftop terrace contracted for a New Year's gathering that had a waiting list of 41 names and a per-person minimum that made even Wren's expression shift slightly when I showed him the numbers. The city's hospitality board, without being asked or prompted, issued a letter naming the Aldenvere's restoration as the most significant contribution to regional tourism infrastructure in a decade. I framed it and put it in the coat check office, which was now a general manager's office, because Dominic Carre had formally appointed me as the Aldenvere's permanent general manager on the morning after the opening. In a conversation that lasted 6 minutes and that contained more direct emotional disclosure than I had heard from him in the entire preceding 11 months combined, he said, "I've watched you work for 4 years. I read every operations report you filed. I walked the Miravel boutique alone the month after you turned it around, and I understood something about how you see things that I had not understood from paper. I gave you the Aldenvere because you were the only person in any room I've ever been in who treated a broken thing like it was worth saving. I have been a broken thing for a long time. I wanted to see if you'd know what to do with me too. I sat with that for a moment in the coat check office, in the Victorian green chair in the morning light. Then I said, I'd probably start with 11 pages of notes. He almost smiled. It was the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen on that face. I decided I would spend a considerable amount of time hereafter trying to see it again. The Aldenveer opened its second full season in March, with a wait list for every weekend through June and a corporate inquiry file that I was managing actively and selectively. Odile Bren's restaurant received a Michelin Bib Gourmand in February, which she accepted with the precise grace of someone who had expected nothing less and was grateful for the confirmation. The ballroom was booked 14 months out. I hired a team of 8. All of them people who had been overlooked in some specific and documentable way at their previous positions. A front desk manager named Theo, who had been passed over for promotion 3 times at a branded hotel in the district because his former employer had apparently noted in his personnel file he was not the face we're going for. A head of housekeeping named Agata, who had run the department at a luxury property across the waterfront for 12 years without ever being given the title. A night auditor named Priya, who was working 2 jobs to finish her hospitality degree, and who read yield management reports the way I had at her age, hungry and fast and completely without fear. I told all of them, in the first staff meeting, that the Aldenveer's operational philosophy was simple. Every person who walked through our doors would feel, for the duration of their stay, that they were worth the best of everything this building had to offer. I looked around the room at my team, at all of the people who had been told, in one language or another, that they were too much or not enough or simply unremarkable. And I said, that starts with us believing it about ourselves. No one said anything, but something shifted in the room, like something had been set right that had been crooked for a long time. Dominicari still does not put anything on his desk. He still speaks in statements that are questions and silences that contain more information than most people's paragraphs. He still makes Renvasile nervous by existing in a room, and he still makes the city's most powerful people move through their conversations slightly differently when he is present, the way a barometer responds to a change in pressure before anyone can feel it in the air. He is still the most dangerous man in every room he enters, except for one. The Aldenveer's coat check office, converted into a general manager's suite that holds a mahogany desk, a filing cabinet, a lamp with a green glass shade, and one Victorian velvet wingback chair in deep green that Sue Park had shipped to me from his warehouse, and in which Dominic Carre now sits when he visits, which is more often than I had expected, and exactly as often as I want him to, watching me work with an expression I can only describe as reverent. The same expression, I think, that crossed my face when I pressed a tile aside in a drop ceiling and found Venetian glass glowing underneath, intact that he did not expect to find. Like he has found something intact that he did not expect to find. Like he is being careful not to damage it. He told me once, late on a Tuesday when the hotel was asleep around us and the waterfront lights moved on the water outside the window, that he had purchased the Aldenveer, knowing it could not be saved by anyone currently in his orbit, that he had been waiting, with a patience he had not recognized in himself as patience until much later, for someone who would not need to be told what the building was worth. He said, I gave you the worst thing I owned, because I believed you were the best person I had ever encountered, and I wanted to see what you would do with it. I was not wrong. I thought about the key, iron and cold, sliding across a conference table. I thought about a woman on a cobbled street at 6:45 in the morning, looking up at a building everyone else had written a eulogy for, deciding to believe in it instead. I thought about midnight blue mosaic glass glowing intact behind a ceiling that everyone else had left in place because it was easier to cover a beautiful thing than to trust that it was still there. No, I said, you weren't wrong. He reached across the desk and took my hand, not gently, the way you take something fragile, but deliberately, the way you take something you intend to keep. And outside the window, the waterfront was lit, and the Aldenveer was full, and the world was, for the moment, arranged in a way that I had worked very hard for and intended to protect, exactly as it should be. And listen, if you made it to this moment with me, I need you to know that this story absolutely wrecked me in the best possible way. The part where she climbs up on that lobby chair and finds the mosaic. I replayed it 4 times while I was writing this. The part where Dominic Carre tells her he has been a broken thing for a long time and wanted to see if she'd know what to do with him. I had to put my notes down and take a walk. If this story hit you the way it hit me, the way it hit me every single time I went back through it, please hit that like button right now because it genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And share it with someone who needs to hear a story about a woman who was given a broken thing and made it extraordinary. Subscribe if you haven't already, and click the notification bell so you are the first person to see the next one. We drop new stories every week, and every single one is built to make you feel exactly this. Leave me a comment below. Who were you rooting against hardest? Harlan Doss in those linen blazers, or the hospitality board who called it a write-off? Because Harlan Doss had me from the very first 3-hour lunch. I'll see you in the next story.